Monday's school committee meeting was the public's chance to weigh in on the budget for Newton schools in the next year. It was a session that was characterized by a gap. That is, the gap between the $4.4 million Superintendent Dr. Anna Nolin says she needs to keep services level and the $3.6 million Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller says she can responsibly allocate for the schools in the next fiscal year. Speaking behind a sign calling on officials to fully fund schools next year, parents weighed in on the proposal, with most asking Mayor Fuller to free up resources for Newton Public Schools and ensure students aren't harmed by funding cuts. Adam Bernstein, whose son Nicholas opened the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, was the first of roughly 15 parents, speaking both in person and online, who asked the mayor to at least fund Dr. Nolan's Level Services Plus budget.
Think about the history of where we've all been and where this could be headed. Nicholas is in fifth grade. This is his first normal school year. A lot of energy of these meetings is taken discussing the relative priorities of the city and NPS on the other side. And that's, NPS is often visually interpreted in terms of like the superintendent and the staff. Don't forget parents sit on both sides of that equation. And we've been through a lot over the past 5-6 years, especially those of us with kids that age. The next 6 years is going to span the pension funding cliff, the superintendent's present tenure, the next NTA contract. And I think the right way to debate those decisions is not rushed in the wake of a surprise budget deficit, reported less than a month ago, when a fast resolution will probably leave a lot of stakeholders feeling not unhappy, but, unheard. There are choices in terms of pension funding philosophies, different kinds of overrides, and the priority levels of various NPS expense items. None of those choices is risk-free.
You have 30 seconds.
But, risk management is not risk avoidance. You've been a very prudent financial manager. You've led on the difficult pension issue for over a decade, going back to your time on the city council. It's possible all those years of prudence have partly been in service of this moment. This is a unique moment of time and would ask you to consider making a larger allocation to NPS from whatever source.
Newton's educators have been amazing to work with. They are knowledgeable, they are thoughtful, and they are intentional. Newton North is an amazing facility, and I feel fortunate that my son has had so many wonderful opportunities because of that. I am concerned, however, when I hear that buildings in the district are in disrepair and not being fixed, that they are inaccessible to many with disabilities. I am concerned when I hear that the curriculum used by the district hasn't been evaluated in over 25 years. I am concerned when I hear that more staff positions may be cut next year. My son has an IEP. He takes honor level classes. He participates in clubs. The budget Superintendent Nolin wishes she could present would support and grow those things. The budget she feels she has to present will keep things as they are, which is okay, but not making improvements is not what makes a school system great. The budget she is being forced to create will erode those things by forcing cuts which will impact vulnerable children the most. Newton cannot expect its reputation for academic excellence to remain intact if growth does not occur. Please support the professional you have put in charge of shaping our school system and guiding it into the future so she can do the job for which you hired her. Thank you.
Tonight, I am here as a low-income special education parent. Dr. Nolin was brought in to lead our school system. She needs the tools to do that. She has done an extensive review of our school system, and without the funding, her budget level at Service Plus does not answer all our problems, but it at least keeps our school system running, it keeps our reputation going, and it invests in our kids. I spent my last tank of gas to come here tonight, the last tank for this whole week to come here tonight, to urge you to please fund Level Service Plus. It is imperative. I voted for you, and I believe that your legacy can be strong, and if you fund it at Level Service Plus, that is the legacy you are leaving. If you don't, it is a detrimental to our school system, and that is the legacy people will remember.
I expect that many times we've all heard the saying, where there's a will, there's a way. I know there are people here in Newton with in-depth knowledge of the city's budget who are able to provide multiple ways that Newton could fund its public schools at the level Dr. Nolin is recommending. So I believe it's not a matter of finding a way. The question, I think, is whether or not we are a city that truly values public education, whether or not we have the will to support our children, their schools, our superintendent, and our community. Because investment in education is good for everyone, not just those of us who access its public schools.
It is not fair to ask a family to pay $1.5 million for a house and yet also tell them in the same breath that they have to send their children to public schools that are not fully funded. But if the Thrive budget cannot be met, let's compromise and show our children that compromise is possible and part of life and necessary. Mayor Fuller, I ask that you do not decide that our children are not worth fighting for. There is so much unrest in the world, and our children are our future. Mayor Fuller, I know you have the final say on the budget, and with that, you have the ability to help set our children and our community on the right path. I hope that you will make the right decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Dr. Nolin had the floor. She explained the cuts that would come if her Level Services Plus proposal was adopted, then went into a list of required cuts under the mayor's proposal. Next, Committee Chair Chris Brezski highlighted the enormous effort to cut significant costs from the school budget before opening up the floor to committee members to ask questions of Superintendent Nolin.
So we are talking about the red budget here and what that is going to entail. And again, just to review, these are the pieces I had to recommend to get to Level Services Plus. So that's a 10 teacher reduction at elementary, 2 at middle, reorganization of the teaching and learning department. And then we said we would utilize more of a budget carry forward, which is more risk for us. We would have to expect and spend more on turnover savings. So that's a gamble that we will hire lower on the salary scale than we retire out. So for $3.7 million, these are the additional cuts that we need after the cuts that I've already shared with you. And again, these are not recommended. 5 additional classroom teachers would reduce the number of teachers at the elementary level, yielding us $485,500. That would mean that at 6 classrooms across the district, there would be 25 students in them, not more than that. That said, I do want to say, with buffer zones placements and summer move-ins, any of those 25s could become higher than that at some point. We just don't know. But that is 6 classrooms across our 241 classrooms that would be existing next year. Second is the secondary budget. This is already a very lean budget, but what we will pull from it in order to attempt to meet this is there are stipends for teachers to take overnight field trips. We will have to build those costs into trips or limit the number of overnight field trips that we have. Obviously, this is for secondary school students, not elementary. We have middle school after school math stipends. It was our intention to redeploy these for MTSS services, but we will not be able to stipend those teachers for additional math services after school. No PC hardware for the secondary ed office. And then 2 teachers from the high school, it says principal discretion, meaning they're looking at their schedules right now. Students are choosing their classes, and we will try to find the least painful place to do that cut. But I have to tell you, the high schools have taken the brunt of the cuts for the last few years, because you can't cancel 4th grade, or you can't cancel, certain aspects, full teams of teachers. So this means less offerings and less people to offer services by 2 teachers. So when we talked about under scheduling and elective offerings in our last meeting, this has an impact on that. We are coming out of a very volatile time for young people. Our current 5th graders have had the majority, you just heard our pledge person's dad say, the majority of their schooling was impacted by odd COVID learning conditions, and the social emotional developmental levels of these young people is different from other time periods. I would consider myself an expert in middle school, as I was a longtime teacher and principal there, and we are seeing behaviors and needs there that we would have seen in elementary school in decades prior. We're worried about this, but we are looking for anything to not reduce by more teachers and more academic support staff. You heard our IT director in the technology department ask for $650,000 worth of replacement equipment, and then we capped that at 150 for this year. We would pull that out for this year, which would not allow us. We're trying again to get on a regular cycle of replacement for those projectors in the classrooms, the laptops, digital document cameras, things that teachers use every day to ensure that the learning ecosystem is fluid and that multiple means of representation can be done for our varied learners. I'll tell you, if projectors go out in mass, like Bigelow, for example, is still using desktop projectors, that technology is 10 years old. So at this point, this takes us to still needing $1 million worth of cuts. So I'm going to stop here because I need further guidance and direction, because now we're going to get to things like music programs, athletics, things that are not required and mandated, but that vastly affect a student's experience and their development as humans.
Now, could we hear a little bit more about the status of the one-time funding requests? Because I think that had been an explicit ask in terms of assembling the business cases, putting forward why they would be helpful, why they would be one-time, and making a strong case, I hope, for getting them funded from free cash.
There's been a lot of back and forth. I would say there was initially maybe more progress than has occurred recently, that we've perhaps hit diminishing returns on. I mean, obviously the administration went to City Hall with the items they felt were the most qualifying items, I think there's probably some agreement about some of them, not nearly enough to bridge the type of gap we're talking about here.
At what point in the year must you, as mayor, certify the school's allocation? Or essentially, what would you say is your deadline for having this part done?
So I am presenting this to the City Council, the budget, which includes the NPS funding, on April 22nd. They have to vote within 45 days of that.
And I will share that the somewhat radical thinking that led to that question is to essentially delay by taking no action with regard to the budget until such time as we have to. And I'm listening closely, April 22nd is that date in your mind. And the reason that might be a preferable approach is that it gives time to resolve some open questions. That being, what is the final amount of funding for the Newton Public Schools, taking into account the Education Stabilization Fund, the allocation, available free cash. All three things combined will tell us what it is we're working with. And I think, as the superintendent has said, she does need that additional time, even just to figure out where would I make an additional 1.067 of cuts if need be.
Moving forward, whether it's one kind, however we find that way forward, to avoid this from happening, and if that's with one-time cash for this year, I am fine with that, because I have sat in budget meetings and I have been asked the question of, what can we do with the stabilization fund? How much money do we need? And I've said, I don't know. I can't answer that question until I know how big that hole is down the road. That hole, when we went to City Council last April, after the budget, after the strike, after the stabilization fund was set up, and we said, look, guys, we still have a big problem a couple years from now, and we need to solve that, and we all need to start working on that today. There has been nothing done over the past year to help solve that problem. And I have not been in one budget meeting where I haven't said, We need to solve that problem, and there has been no engagement on solving that problem. It's solvable. It just takes the damn will to want to solve it.